بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد
وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين أجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to continue our study of al-Qur'an by the late Ayat Misbah. As you remember, last week we said that there is possibility of having knowledge of the unseen, ilmul ghaib, and this is a kind of knowledge which is not ordinary, which is not conventional, and it can be for the prophets and even sometimes non-prophets. And we mentioned that according to the Qur'an, knowledge of ilmul ghaib in the first place belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so no one can have knowledge of the ghaib independently except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Qur'an itself shows that Allah has given this ilmul ghaib to some people that He is pleased with. So this is what we discussed last session. Now, Ayat Misbah makes this question: what's the meaning of what we have in some hadith that some awliyaullah have knowledge of jami' ma kana wa ma yakun? Whatever has happened and is going to happen is known to them. What is the meaning of it? And also one may wonder, how is it possible that someone knows everything? So many details are there. This is a very delicate discussion, and I will try to many times read exactly what Ayatollah Misbah says and translate so that we don't go far from what he literally said. He says in some of the hadith, Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam have referred to some of the points that they didn't want this to be shared with everyone. They were saying to the companions, to the people who were present, that they shouldn't share this with some people who may not have capacity to understand, and they may, God forbid, then think that a kind of uluhiyyah, a kind of deity is there for Imams or awliyaullah. Even, for example, we have this hadith from the Prophet himself that had it not been that he is worried, he is concerned that some people may think about Imam Ali what some thought about Jesus, he would have mentioned some of the merits and virtues of Amirul Mu'minin alayhi salam that maybe not people are aware of those things. But he didn't mention because he was worried that people have no capacity, then they may think Ali is, na'udhu billah, God, or I don't know, son of God, or etc. Only people whose heart is tested and examined, those that imtahanallahu qulubahum, those that Allah has tested and found suitable, they have capacity to understand these things. Many people would not understand, and some people may even not only they don't understand, they may be confused, they may lose iman, or they may lose balance, etc. He says some of these hadiths have leaked out the term he uses darz karde, means leaking out. And some have put them together and have compiled books on these things, and there are hints in those hadiths that are not at the level of our understanding. We can try to have some taqrib, like taqrib bizehn, is a way to make sense of them, a way to articulate them so that we can, at least understand the meaning of the words, so that if we hear these things, we would not be shocked and we would not feel they are against Quran and Sunnah. Okay, so now what we try to do is just to make taqrib, a kind of simplified version of these hadiths based on the philosophical ground, so that you can make sense of these things and understand, and don't think that they are against the Quran and Hadith or Aql. He says what we can say as taqrib to bring it closer to our understanding and our mind is this: نفوس مقدس انبیا و ائمه علیهم السلام به زبان فلسفه دارای مراتبی بودند. If you want to use philosophical language, we can say the souls, the pure souls of the prophets and Imams had different levels. Previously in the discussion about ilm, about knowledge, we said sometimes you know something, but you may not be aware of your knowledge. So you have knowledge, but not knowledge of the knowledge. What does it mean? It means that our nafs has different levels. At one level, there is knowledge about something. But in another level, which is maybe more closer to our short memory, for example, you are not aware of it. You are heedless of it. So, nafs has different levels. So, another example, sometimes you know something in a detailed way, sometimes you know something as a whole. The example he says that we find in our textbooks is malakeh ijtihad. Malakeh here doesn't mean queen. Malakeh is a permanent quality of the soul. When we say permanent, means it's not easily changed. And because of this, then actions which are suitable easily are done. كيفية نفسانية راسخة تصدر عنها الأفعال بسهولة من دون تروي. It's used for virtues, vices. For example, if you have malaka of generosity, so you can easily then do generous acts. But malaka also can be a quality for knowledge. For example, malakeh ijtihad. Ijtihad is not knowledge of few prepositions or hadith and rules, etc. Ijtihad is a quality in the jurist by which, when new questions are raised to him, he can find the answer. If you ask him questions about wuzu, about tahara, about salat, about zakat, about fasting. He answers. But in his mind, maybe thousands of people, ask him questions from different backgrounds, different places. He answers. But it's not that in his mind all these questions and answers were in a detailed way there. He has a quality which is simple, is basit, is like a whole, but enables him to know the answer to these questions, which are detailed. And he says, modern science has not yet been able to explain this quality of malakah. Knowledge is one of the areas which is very difficult to understand how it works at the level of body and brain, but also at the level of nafs, because main place for knowledge is nafs. But malakah is even more difficult than knowledge of details. So he says, if someone has malakah, but still a question is not raised to him, he is khal al-zihn. His zihn is empty about this question. For example, someone says, I come from this island, this is my situation, what should I do? Okay, before asking this question, his zihn was empty about this question. Another person who is not mujtahid, also his zihn is empty about this question. Both of them are khal al-zihn. But the one who has malakah knows this question, not in a detailed way. Okay, so although it's empty, but means as one level, in another level, he knows that. So, in philosophical language, we say, نفس مرتبه‌ای دارد که این علوم در آن به نحو تفصیل موجود است، اما مرتبه دیگر از نفس نیز وجود دارد که به صورت اجمال، به صورت بساطت و اجمال و اندماج در آن وجود است. So nafs has two levels. In one level, these facts, these are there, but in a detailed way. In another level, in a simple and compressed way. There are two levels. And please be aware, منظور از اجمال ابهام نیست، بساطت است. This is a very important point. Very much I liked this sentence. When we say is mujmal, we mean it's simple. It's not detailed. We don't mean ambiguous here, because mujmal in Arabic sometimes is ambiguous. Like in ilm usul we have mujmal and mubayyan. Here mujmal, like we say ilm ijmal. Here we say mujmal means basit. Ilm mujmal. So imagine a mujtahid who has malakeh ijtihad and someone who knows 1,000 or few thousand mas'ala, but he has memorized them. You shouldn't think this one who has memorized these masail is more knowledgeable than this mujtahid who has malakah, but maybe he has not memorized all these masail. So ilm basit, ijmali in this sense, is in mujtahid. Maybe the mujtahid has ilm tafsili or no, but someone else has ilm tafsili but not ijtihad. I think once I told you, my first teacher, who was in Tehran, rahmatullah alayh, he said, because he was from city of Arak in central Iran, and he said, when he was going for tabligh or summer holidays, but doing tabligh, he said he was very familiar with masail, and people were asking him questions and he was giving fatwa very easily. But there was a mujtahid there in Iraq. He was very knowledgeable, but when people ask him questions, he was always saying, for example, not always, but most of the time, I have to check. And some people thought that I know more than him because they ask me and I give them answer right away. But he says I have to check, not knowing that I was just talabe, has studied, but not a mujtahid like him. He needed to check. And then he said this, al-mujtahidu man idha raja'a alima. Mujtahid is the one that when he refers, he finds out the answer. So, if you look at this issue from a layperson mentality, you may say, oh, this person is better because he has all the answers, in a detailed way. But if you look at it from a scholarly perspective, the one who has ilm basit is much higher. Now, he says, with this point, we can be ready to understand. This was for the sake of preparation. So now, from this, we can understand that the human soul can have higher levels in which sciences or ulum are more basit, more simple than they are in our mind. Look at the example of mujtahid, but now imagine someone who has even more simple knowledge. For example, this person has malaki ijtihad in fiqh, this one in, for example, philosophy, this one in, tafsir, etc. Imagine if someone has all these malakat again in one simple way. It's possible. نفس انسان می تواند دارای مرتبه والاتری باشد که در آن همه علوم به صورت بسیط‌تری از آنچه در ذهن ماست وجود داشته باشد. Human soul can have higher level in which all sciences are there more simple than what they are in our minds. And he says this is in line with a rule that we have, a philosophical rule. What is that philosophical rule? To the surprise of maybe people who are not familiar with philosophy, the philosophical rule is this: the more perfect a being is, the more simple it becomes. In other words, those which are more detailed, more tafsili, more juz'i, more mutakathir, they are lower. So if you imagine a pyramid of existence, when we go higher, it's less expanded, it's less diverse, less detailed, less multiple. And then when we reach the top, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is absolutely basit min jami' al-jihad. Even you cannot make distinction between wujud and mahiyya in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This wujud and mahiyya is for mumkinat. Although mahiyat is not separate in existence, but even in understanding, we don't find such distinction between wujud and mahiyya in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the rule is this: وجود هر قدر کامل تر باشد بسیط تر است و کثرت در آن کمتر است. The more a being is perfect, the more simple it is and the less multiple it is. Then we can add to this what we have said so far. We can add to this what we find in many hadiths, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in addition to nafs and ruh that we took for other human beings, has maqam nuraaniyyah, has the position or the level of nuraaniyyah, being a light. He says even some of these hadiths are narrated by our Sunni brothers. For example, we have hadith that أَوَّلُ مَا خَلَقَ اللَّهُ نُورُ النَّبِيِّ. The first thing Allah created is the light of the Prophet. He says there is a hadith that our Sunni brothers have also quoted, that Allah first created the light of the Prophet and Imam Ali, etc. He says this maqam nuraaniyyat, this position of being nur, is very high position. Or for example, in some hadith says Allah from the light of his azama, from light of his grandeur, created the light of the Prophet. What does it mean to create from his light? This is an expression which is mutashabih. You should not understand it literally or physically. Allah has no part, or there is no physical light for him. It's not that he takes part of himself and creates something. Certainly it doesn't mean all that. This light is not a material light. It's a matter of tajalli, manifestation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the highest level of existence, and nothing is distracted from him. But there are manifestations of him. Part of his light or aspects of his light can be manifested in some beings that he creates. He says what we have in some hadith, that for example Rasulullah said to Salman, ma'rifatuna bin nuraaniyyah, knowing us as nuraaniyyah, or knowing our nur background, is highest position. He says it refers to this kind of fact, this kind of point, this kind of position. And he says this is different and higher than what philosophers refer to as nafs or ruh, soul or spirit. This position of nuraaniyyah is higher than that. For example, philosophically, we may say, like Mullah Sadra, that nafs is jismaniyatul huduth, rawhaniyatul baqa. So we may say nafs is hadith. Yeah? Even some people may say ruhaniyatul huduth. But anyway, philosophers normally say nafs is hadith, unlike some muhaddithin. They say human spirit is created. But he says this is about nafs or ruh. This is not about nuraaniyyah. Because that realm, that way of considering existence and reality is higher than nafs and ruh. So he says, پس می توان گفت که نفس پیامبر صلی الله علیه و آله به حدوث بدن حادث است. So it's possible to say that the soul of the Prophet is created with creation of his body. It's possible to say. It's not نامعقول. فرضی نامعقول نیست. To say that as Mullah Sadra, for example, said, human soul is created at certain stage of development of the embryo. ثُمَّ أَنْشَأْنَاهُ خَلْقًا آخَرَ. Also he says, may refer to this. Mullah Sadra says. خب, Rasulullah's nafs also can be like this. His nafs is created at certain point and didn't exist before that point in time. But اما با این معنا هم منافاتی ندارد که نور پیامبر صلی الله علیه و آله بالاتر از مقامی است که به آن نفس میگوییم. The light of the Prophet is higher than that position or level that we call nafs. Nafs is one level, nuraaniyyah is higher level. He says in the hadith also there is hint, there is reference that from that light Allah created our spirits, and from the remainder created the spirits of our Shia. So nuraaniyyah is different from روح and nafs. به هر حال بیانی است بالاتر از آنچه که فهم متعارف به آن میرسد. He says in any case this is an account which is higher than what average understanding can reach, and only those people who are very much sharp and trained in intellectual discussions can have taqribi. They can have a kind of explanation or kind of way to simplify this and understand. To understand the reality of it, you need to experience. But at least those who are very trained and sharp, they can make sense of it, they can understand. باری آن مقام نورانیتی که برای پیامبر صلی الله علیه و آله و ائمه سلام الله علیهم ثابت می شود، چون محیط و در بردارنده همه زمانها و مکانها، بلکه علت فاعلی کل ما سوی الله می باشد و همه کمالات اشیا در آن موجود است علی نعت البساطه، پس بر همه چیز احاطه وجودی دارد. This is very much central point of our discussion. That maqam, position of nuraaniyyah that the Prophet and Imams have, because it's encompassing all times and spaces, or even more, anything other than Allah is through this. They are illat fa'iliya kull ma siwa Allah. So Allah has created this, and from this other things are created. So they are illat fa'ili for lower things. You remember illat fa'ili, the agent, the one that creates. We have illat fa'ili, we have illat gha'i, illat suri, illat madi, 4 types of illa, you remember. و همه کمالات اشیا, all the perfections of things are in them, because illat fa'ili should have whatever is in ma'lulat, because they receive from illat fa'ili, and illat fa'ili from its own illat fa'ili. So there is nothing in ma'lul which is not available in illat. So whatever kamalat are there in ashya, they are in them, but ala na'til bisata, in a simple way. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the top, who has everything that exists in beings, but of course not in a multiple, divided, detailed way. So they have ihataye wujudi, so they have existential embracement or inclusiveness. In Allah's level, we say Allah has knowledge of everything. In presence, knowledge of presence, ilm huzuri. Time, space, they don't make any difference. Now, these beings who are mazhar tam asma ilahi, they are perfect manifestations of Allah's names. Their knowledge is also inclusive, and their knowledge is manifestation of Allah's knowledge. So they know what is lower than them and under them بنحو بساطت, in a simple way, and huzuri, they have knowledge by presence. And this knowledge is different from the knowledge that we attribute to ordinary people, that saying that someone is alim or allama. That's different type of knowledge. Then he makes a more general point. He says, sometimes we say to an action which is not done by other people, they say this is a divine action that a person has done. We say kar ilahi. Of course, you can say godly action, for example, or divine action, because no one can do this, like miracles. For miracles, we say this is an act of God, for example, although this person has brought it, but it is God who has done it. But in another aspect or sense, we can say even our ordinary actions are actions of God. Yeah? According to Tawhid Af'ali, everything is an action of God. But there is no problem in saying that everything is action of God, but at the same time, this person has done it. Ma ramayta idh ramayta, walakin Allah rama. On the one hand, Allah says ramayta. The Prophet did shoot the arrow, but also we say it was not you. Means it was not you independent from Allah. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's an action of God, not you only. When it comes to those actions which ordinary people cannot do, and we say these are actions of God, it's more obvious that it's not just because of Tawhid Af'ali, it's more than Tawhid Af'ali, it's because other people cannot do this. It's more than that. But we can still attribute this to the person who brings this mu'jiza. But bi'idhnillah. So Allah may enable someone to do something that is godly or something that ordinary people cannot do. But bi'idhnillah. Knowledge is also similar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, Surah Kahf, Ayah 110, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُوحَى إِلَيَّ. Tell them I am a human being like you. I receive revelation. Revelation is a knowledge which is khuda'i. Revelation is not something that you can learn in the school or library, etc. It comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So at the same time that the Prophet is a human being, but he has been given this special knowledge. So on the one hand, we can say Prophet has nothing. Prophet is faqir. Alam yajadka yatiman fa'awa wa wajadaka dhallan fahada wa wajadaka a'ilan fa'aghna, in Surah Duha. So Prophet is faqir. The Prophet was without guidance, in the sense that in his essence he doesn't have guidance. Everything comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But on the other hand, he can say yuha ilayya. He can say I have this knowledge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is no conflict. Isa alayhi salam, in Surah Al-Imran verse 49, he says, Inni akhluqu lakum min at-tin kahay'at at-tayr or أني أخلق لكم من الطين كهيئة الطير مثلا أنفخ فيه فيكون طيرا, or continues أحيي الموتى بإذن الله, أخلق أنفخ أحيي is متكلم وحده. So he says, I am doing this. But at the same time, we know that it's not him alone, him independently. So in mu'jiza, we can attribute to the person who brings mu'jiza, but we know that it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he says, حاصل آنکه علوم خاصی که از طرف خداوند متعال به پیامبران و بندگان شایسته خدا افاضه می شود، از یک نظر باید آنها را علوم خدا دانست. The special types of knowledge that Allah gives to the prophets and his chosen servants, from one perspective, these are علوم خدا. These sciences, this knowledge belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because they don't have knowledge of themselves. By themselves they don't have knowledge. و طبیعت انسانیشان اقتضای داشتن آنها را ندارد. Their human nature doesn't, require that they must have this knowledge. Human nature is free or empty from this kind of knowledge. So it's knowledge from Allah, but as nazar digar, from another perspective, you can say this knowledge belongs to this prophet or this wali khuda, because Allah has given them. So those arguments that say ilmul ghayb are exclusive to Allah are talking about first perspective, that this is knowledge from God, not from human nature, even human nature of the prophet. But from second perspective, we can say they have this knowledge, and this is compatible with what we had before, that ilmul ghayb can be taught by Allah to others. As سوی دیگه, another point, هنگامی که مرتبه طبیعی و نیز مرتبه نفسانی ایشان ملاحظه شود, when physical level or psychological, or you can say psychic level of them, the level of nafs. So when the physical level or psychic level of the prophets and awliyaullah are considered, are observed, احکام اجسام و جسمانیات مانند ولادت و مرگ و تغییر و تحول و etc. برایشان ثابت میشد. The things like birth, death, changes are attributed to them. The Prophet has a body, so ahkam of body are applicable. The Prophet has nafs, ahkam of nafs can be applicable to him. ولی هنگامی که مقام نورانیت ایشان ملاحظه می گردد. But when we consider the position of nuraaniyyah, or مقامی که واسطه فیض الهی می باشد, when they are considered as a channel for divine faith and grace to come. They are the medium for grace of Allah to come and spread. If we are observing and considering this aspect, then another set of things would be applicable. Birth, death, illness, etc. for their body, for their soul. But مقام نورانیه, مقام واسطه فیض have different rulings. که برای افراد متعارف قابل فهم نیست. And these are not understandable for ordinary people, and this is why in our hadith it has been said, don't share with everyone such points, which is about مقام نورانیت و واسطه فیض. از این روی در روایات شریفه تأکید شده که این گونه مطالب در دسترس همگان قرار داده نشود. In our noble hadith it has been emphasized on that such things should not be made available for همگان, for the public, for all people. So we just tried to have taqreeb, a kind of explanation that you can understand a little bit. We can know what are the things that we are talking about. But if you want to go into more discussion, of course, that's different. Inshallah, in the next session, we talk about human power. So we talked about knowledge as one requirement of exercising our free will, because without knowledge you cannot exercise free will at all, or you cannot exercise it properly if you have limited knowledge. And then inshallah we talk about power, because with power you can also exercise your free will, otherwise you cannot. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a couple of questions though.
Yes.
You talked upon the nurani aspect of Prophet and Ahlul Bayt.
Yes.
Now in these days of Muharram we have groups of people who come on the mimbar and say things about prophets, and there are quite a few groups which are very malang and they bring this miraculous aspect, but they literally verge at least up to hulul, if not shirk. They say things like, say, Allah is Mu'min, but Hazrat Ali is Amir al-Mu'mineen, so Allah is also a follower, or very bizarre things about...
They really say this?
Yeah, pardon?
They say this?
They say this.
Oh.
Yeah. And things about Hazrat Abbas, which are literally bordering on, I mean, things we haven't heard, but there might be some riwayat like that in some books, we don't know. Then people come and ask us whether they should be listening to these kind of majalis, what should they be doing? Because obviously it sounds very bizarre, but then they start saying that you are not a true follower, you don't believe in ghaib, you don't believe in their excellence of the Prophet and his progeny and those kind of things. So it's become a difficult situation. I mean, these ladies were asking me, this lady is reading riwayat like, say, the ancestor of Hazrat Abbas from his mother's side, he came to Prophet and Prophet gave him something mixed in his saliva mixed in some earth and made him eat, and then he wanted to become the wasi, and Prophet says that yes, you have all the abilities of becoming my wasi, but because Allah has already fixed Hazrat Ali to become my wasi, I can't do that, but I'll give you a son who will be called Mawla. So those kind of things, and then people try to verify it from us. I mean, I'm not in that majlis, so I don't know what exactly was spoken, but how do we deal with these kind of issues?
Yeah. First of all, we ourselves should not bring this to public gatherings, classes, lectures, etc. This is not the way that Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam asked the Shia to talk about them, or educate their children about it. So we should follow the mainstream, the Quranic perspective, something that a Sunni can also understand, for example, a non-Shia. Not that something that even some Shia cannot understand. Yeah. So if we want to introduce Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and the Prophet, we should speak in the way that Sunnis appreciate, even Christians may appreciate. But if you speak in this way, even Shia have difficulty, many Shia have difficulty. So we should not use this kind of approach. But when others do, I think it depends who are they. If they are people who have knowledge and, for example, if, once upon a time, Ayatollah Misbah or Ayatollah Jawadi Amuli say something like this, of course, we should respect, we shouldn't reject or deny, but we shouldn't spread these things. We should not promote these things to the public. But if people who have no knowledge, say things, especially if they say things like, to say that Amirul Mu'minin is someone that Allah has to use be under his command, things like this. These are, of course, very dangerous, and without causing confrontation, we have to say to people that they should not listen to such things and they should not invite such people.
Yeah, thank you, Sheikh.
Yeah.
The other question is that, because there's this big drive from Iran and elsewhere that we should be saying exactly correct masayib that have been reported in the books and everything. Whereas for tragedies, even in our cultures, there's many things that are just said zabane-hal, sort of, that this might have happened. So how much liberty do we have? Because some people have just literally stopped doing masayib based on that, the tragedy. Even in Muharram, they just say some 2 lines and get down. Although even in the books, there is quite a lot of tragedy there which can be dealt with. So what should be the limit, really, especially in Muharram Majalis?
If there is something reported in the books that are, respected books, who is the author, how author has a good reputation, so there's no problem, unless you have reason to think that this is not right. But generally speaking, if something is a maqtal of, Abi Mikhnaf, or, Lahuf of Sayyid ibn Tawus, or, for example, Nafas al-Mahmoum by Sheikh Abbas Qummi, or, in Irshad Sheikh Mufid. So if there is something there, you can quote. If it's something verbally received and it is something that doesn't cause problem, so still you can say as Zabana Hal, there is no problem, because you are saying it's Zabana Hal, it was a poem, it's a poetic language. But if people are going to take it literally from you, then you have to just say, this is the source, or I have heard this, or, this is said, But I think it's very good if we commit ourselves to say masa'ib from the books, or clearly say, I want to read this poem for you. It's a poem. It's a poetic language, or Zaban Hal, etc. I'm not saying this is literally said, because we shouldn't deprive ourselves and people also from listening to maqatil and having emotional engagement and cry, but on the basis of something which is reliable.
Thank you. One more, because it isn't clear to me, because these ladies specifically asked me whether we should be going to such majalis. And because I hadn't attended that, I didn't know what to say really.
Which majalis?
The majalis in which these other ladies do ghulu and all this kind of stuff that is being spoken about Hazrat Abbas and all. Because this lady is apparently coming to homes and doing and making it like very, very strong kind of majalis with all the malang stuff and all the narabazi and everything. But the ladies are concerned about the content as well, but because they have good relations with the host, so they don't want to boycott or something or not go, but they wanted an answer whether they should be attending such majalis once they have known that this lady is going to say these kind of things every time.
If they say every time, I think they should not attend. And maybe they can say to the host, I love to come, but these are problematic things, and you should invite someone or ask the same person to say good things, or some if it's not possible to explain it, maybe they can go just few minutes and at the end, But we shouldn't encourage such people, because these people, if they are encouraged, then other people learn from them and repeat these things. And the way I understand the approach of Ahlul Bayt was that when it comes to non-Shia, they were very flexible, encouraging Shia to be in good terms with the Sunnis, take part in salat, funeral, visiting them, giving them gift. But when it comes to people who do ghuluv, Ahlul Bayt were not flexible. Ahlul Bayt even sometimes curse them, those who do ghuluv, because these are people who are counted on them and they damage and distort. So if we bring a Sunni, for example, sometimes, and talks, it's maybe better. I'm not saying we should do this always, because we have to encourage our, educate our own people also. But in some gatherings, public gatherings, etc., sometimes we have, interfaith, etc., intra-faith. So we may bring a Sunni to talk, no problem, as long as the audience are prepared. But we should never invite a ghali, whether it's for community or outside, etc., because these people who do ghuluv, they damage the image of our mazhab. Even I think sometimes people think in this way, I'm not saying all the people, but sometimes, even in this way they try to, attract more, people towards themselves. So there is no end, they can say every year more.
Thank you.
May Allah bless you, inshallah. Iltimas dua.
Muhtaj dua.
Iltimas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Jazakumullah.